And we are live. Welcome everybody to Man After God, where we take current events and questions that you may be asking and analyze them from a biblical perspective. We want to know, what does God in the Bible have to say about this? And this is an experiment done in 1930 that was absolutely horrific. The result of it, you won't believe. It is crazy that this happened, but we'll find out why they did it, and also what happened to the ape, what happened to the child. And we want to know, what does the Bible say about this? We want to know, what if God was truly in charge here and not the scientists? This is a horrific story of the dark side of science, and we're going to go through this and really discuss what happens here. If you are in the Toronto area and would like to join us for church, please join us this Sunday at 1:45 p.m. at Conquer Assembly. Why don't we get right into it and then do our analysis? We'll go to about the 1 minute mark, and then we'll proceed to analyze this from a biblical standpoint.
Throughout history, stories of humans being raised by animals have fascinated mankind. The feral children have found their way into human culture throughout the ages, from Tarzan all the way back to Romulus and Remus suckling from the she-wolf. Infants seemingly offer a blank slate upon which language, culture, nationality and morality are inscribed throughout their development. Because of this, child development is a miracle of learning, and as such, it has not only fascinated the likes of Rudyard Kipling, but also that of scientists. And one such scientist would devise an experiment, but instead of putting a child into the wild to be raised by animals, turn the tables and take one of our closest relatives of the animal kingdom and raise it as a human. Today we're looking at the ape and the child experiment. Welcome to the dark side of science. Our story starts...
Okay, so here we have an intro of really what's happening. Humans were interested in the fact that humans could survive in wild environments, that they would grow up being able to adapt to various animals. And this experiment really was inspired by a fascination of these feral children raised by animals, and exploring if animals could do the same thing. If humans could be animalized, so to speak, then could animals also be humanized through nurture, by being nurtured by humans? And how do we look at this from a biblical and Christian perspective? Because at this point, the Bible teaches us that humans are uniquely created in God's image, that we are image bearers of God. We possess this intrinsic value and this spiritual capacity because it is from God. And this dignity, in fact, sets humanity, you and I, apart from animals, making our ethical treatment of all creation, including animals, including these chips, paramount. In Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Psalms 8:6-8, you have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the breast of the beast of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. And we see that even until now, all the way fast forward thousands and thousands of years, 2024, and if you're watching this in 2025, we'll know that humanity is the S tier of the animal kingdom. Some people might say, well, we are part of that animal kingdom. But according to the Word of God, we are set apart. That we are the difference between us and every other animal, despite maybe having similar genetics or having a similar DNA sequence, that we are indeed set apart because we are image bearers of God. You know, they wanted to do this experiment because finding out that chimpanzees share a lot of our DNA. We share similar DNA structures. But you know also what shares a lot of DNA with humans? Are mice. 99% of human genes have counterparts in mice, and that's why oftentimes they're used in clinical trials. Oftentimes early stage clinical trials, experimentation is done with mice, because 99% of human genes have counterparts in mice, with only a small difference in DNA sequence. Let's continue.
On the Abreu colony in Cuba in 1930, with the birth of a female chimpanzee on the 15th of November. The baby chimp and her mother and father were donated to the Yerkes National Primate Research Center not long after her birth. The research center was headed by eugenicist Robert Yerkes and was used for medical research into comparative psychology. The baby chimpanzee was given the name Gua, and in June 1931 she was forcibly removed from her mother's cage and was sent off to a new home at the age of 7.5 months for a comparative experiment. Her new family was scientists Luella and Winthrop Kellogg, and their 10-month-old son, Donald. But before we carry on, here's some background information to the Kelloggs and why this young chimp became a resident in their house. Winthrop and Luella had married in 1920. The couple had met in Indiana University while studying. Winthrop was involved in a very diverse set of research subjects, but the 1920s focused on conditioning and learning. He was fascinated with relative influence of nature and nurture on behaviour, and if you could isolate the nurture element. What if you could raise an animal, a primate for example, in the exact same way as you would an infant. Would the chimpanzee's development change, or maybe would it even begin to act like a human? He had been planning the concept of a comparative experiment during his postgraduate days at Columbia when studying for his master's in 1927. Kellogg during this time was fascinated with accounts of feral children living with wolves. He believed that the infants learned to live like wolves because that was what their environment demanded of them. Thus, if the tables were turned, with a wild animal could nurture overall heredity and even humanize it, the birth of Kellogg's first child offered a unique opportunity, and that was to comparatively raise.
So imagine knowing that, okay, well, I'm having a child, my first child, and for the sake of science, in the name of science, I'm not going to raise them up normally. I'm going to raise them up with a sister monkey. I mean, this is what happens when you put other things above God, when we seek to have the power of God. And this is what's happening in this situation here. We'll find out how horrific this can get, but it's just a reminder that we should never put things above God, and that the result of it could be, as this video is gonna soon reveal to us, it's gonna be horrific.
The child alongside a primate. Kellogg devised if he could raise a chimp with Donald, their son, like siblings, he could then see the nature differences. The chimpanzee wouldn't be a pet, but treated in the exact same way as the human child. They would be fed by bottle, bathed, clothed, handled, and pushed around in a pram. It would be induced to walk upright, the same as a child, and would be corrected in its mistakes, like a human as well. The chimpanzee would also be taught and encouraged to eat with a spoon and to play like a child with children's toys. The primate would not be allowed to learn in any other way than the human way, thus allowing the experiment a chance to succeed in creating a human-acting chimp. In order to facilitate his experiment, Kellogg would seek help from Yerkes. He received the Social Science Research Council Fellowship to work at the Yale Arthropod Station in Florida in order to prepare for his experiment in 1931. Needless to say, this would necessitate for Kellogg's family moving to Florida, and not long after, the chimpanzee would join the family to start this bizarre experiment.
Indeed, we would see that this is a bizarre experiment. So this is the beginnings of it. This is the initial goal. Imagine having a child and thinking, I have an idea. I'm going to raise my firstborn child with a monkey, and I will make my firstborn child an experiment. Imagine what could go wrong. Instead of giving that child and prioritizing love, we're going to prioritize science. And this is why also a lot of people who have the argument that, science is the ultimate truth, when in fact science doesn't answer a lot of questions that the Bible can answer. And I talk about that in another video, and we won't go into that today. But we see here that Goa, this young chimpanzee, right, little baby girl, was introduced to the Kellogg household. Kellogg, I wonder if they have any relatives to the cereal, where she would be treated identically to their son. So they would grow up literally brother and sister. And the son's name is Donald, and they want to test if this monkey can adapt human-like behaviors. Now, what we see later is almost the opposite happening. Is that instead of this animal being able to adopt human behaviors, we would see later, unfortunately, that Donald would begin to adopt monkey behaviors, right? The human brain is so brilliant that it can adapt in so many different situations because God gave us a brain really separate from other animals. And, children are not just this blank slate, but we're born, that the Bible tells us that we're born with this nature. And it is this fallen nature that we've inherited from the great fall of Adam and Eve. And this is why we are inherently evil. We will do evil things. And I know that you don't want to hear that because you want to be told that you are amazing and perfect in every single way. But all of you, including myself, have lied, have cheated, have stolen, have done things that are absolutely selfish, have thought things that are absolutely evil. And why is that? Because our nature is fallen. We've inherited that fallen nature from Adam and Eve. And the good news, is that we are still under God's providential care and purpose. That if we would turn to Jesus Christ, we would see the light. And this experiment and these scientists, they approach whatever is happening here with dismissing the God-given nature of the human condition, the human beings, but treating a child's development as a scientific variable. You're looking at this thing and you're going, okay, well, how can I move things around and really assess this from a scientific angle, and solely from a scientific angle? I mean, what could go wrong? And this is what happens to the world, is that when we approach things solely from a scientific, naturalistic worldview, what could go wrong? And we're seeing what can go wrong in the world today. In Psalms 51:5, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Really, these are the dangers of trying to play the role of God. You look at eugenics and the racial purity movement in the 19th and early 20th century. Eugenics became this popular thing to recreate the best of who we are. And in Western society, it was seen as a means to improve the human race. And scientists, supported by the government, promoted sterilization, They forced breeding programs and genetic selection to eliminate traits that we saw were undesirable, that these weak traits or these weak genes. And the most infamous example of this is Nazi Germany and their attempt to create this superior race. And it led to a horrific genocide in the name of what? In the name of being the best of ourselves, in the name of playing God. And playing God with human life, just like what we're seeing in this experiment, and we would soon see how really it is like playing God. It undermines the intrinsic worth of individuals made in the image of God. And just like Donald, we would see what would happen with Donald, that he is made in God's image. And just like the Holocaust and just like these other eugenics programs, to see, hey, what can we do with humanity in the name of science? It will show us the dangers of valuing some lives over other lives and research over humanity and over actual lives, and the inhumanity that can arise when humans try to determine the value of life based on subjective and cultural standards. And we're seeing that in today's environment, unfortunately.
And Donald were introduced at the ages of 7.5 and 10 months respectively in the summer of 1931. And in every conceivable way, the two were treated by Winthrop and Luella as if they were brother and sister. Straight away, the Kellogg's started noting the physical and behavioural differences between the two infants. The former was pretty easy, as the two were different species of animals, and with Gua having longer arms than Donald and much greater physical abilities. Gua had nearly all of her teeth, whereas Donald only had 2. To discover the differences, both physiologically and psychologically, of the two, Kellogg thought up some strange and somewhat cruel experiment. Kellogg took great interest in the differences in how the two's bone structures developed. To explore this, he tested the differences by hitting both Donald and Gua's head with a spoon, to try and hear a difference in the hardening of the skull. He found that Donald's head radiated a dull thud, whereas Gua's made a harsher sound, hinting at the chimpanzee's bones being more hardened. Bizarrely, Kellogg had previously x-rayed Gua and already knew her bone density was equal to that of a 2-year-old human. To ascertain the differences between the two's reaction times, the Kellogg's devised an interesting experiment. Both Donald and the chimpanzee were placed in front of a motion picture camera. This was to allow reviewing of the reactions later on. After the two had settled and the camera was recording, a revolver was fired in the air behind them. Both were startled, and it was discovered that Gua reacted more quickly than her human sibling. The experiment was repeated a few months later with 5 other children, ranging in age between 17 months and 8.5 years. The basic day for the two test subjects consisted of a 7 a.m. wake up with 7:30 a.m. breakfast. Then until 8:30 a.m. sit with the adults at the breakfast table. From 9 in the morning until lunch, the time would be...
Imagine doing all these experiments to test. I mean, you're exposing your child to these experiments that could really harm them. And you're doing it, why? Oh, I want to know what the difference is. Let me hit his head and hit the chimpanzee's head to see the difference in bone density. It's just crazy, right? And then what? Really? Because obviously, oh, well, I found out that the chimpanzee's arms are longer than the kid's arms. Duh. Like you can observably see that. But what was actually achieved from putting this chimpanzee in this situation, and also Donald, this human, in this situation, both of them, we would see, would suffer dramatically.
Be filled out with controlled observations, car rides, outdoor and indoor play, photographing, and various experiments. After lunch, at 12:15, nap time followed by a bath time, and between 15:30 and 1600, more experiments, observations, playtime, and tests, to end up the day at dinner at around 1800 hours, followed by bed at 18:30. The days were not always run strictly to this plan, as the Kellogg's had various different engagements. During the experiment's initial 2 weeks, Gua's reflex behaviour was recorded. An interesting behaviour was noted. The chimpanzee had issues in her balance after standing upright. There were 2 conclusions that the Kellogg's family made about this. The first being due to her still not being fully developed. But the other conclusion was that she was becoming disorientated due to having to look up at her human observers more than if she was in the wild. Probably a bit of both, as this new environment would definitely have been confusing to her. Gua adapted very quickly to her new sleeping arrangements. A cot was constructed and was designed to be usable for an infant child with mattress, clean linens, and even night clothing. When this was temporarily removed, her reaction was predictable. She began to cry out in despair. Gua's reactions when sleepy were very characteristic of a human child. When picked up, she would try and cuddle up, and when sat up, her head would nod down, only to come back up startled by the motion. For the first 2 months, Gua napped more than Donald, mainly after meals, but as she got older, she slept less in a day, eventually getting to the 1 nap as outlined in the day schedule. Donald, on the other hand, was sleeping 2 or more hours in the afternoon nap time. Gua slept during the night without issues throughout the experiment, something that from experience isn't something that a human child often does. But as the experiment progressed, she started to make a nest with her bedding, a thing that chimpanzees do in the wild with twigs in trees. She hadn't seen anyone else do this, and thus showed the behaviour was possibly hereditary, or could be perceived as an infant playing in their bed in the night. Throughout the experiment...
Okay, so obviously it's not just an infant playing in the bed in the night, because when an infant plays in the bed in the night, you don't wake up in the morning with a chimpanzee nest. And this is where really we can see that it's not all nurture, it's not all nature, that the answer to who we are is more complex than, okay, our environmental impact. And we can see here clearly that this ape is naturally programmed to do this. Nobody had to teach this ape to make a nest in the crib, because babies, human babies, don't make nests when they sleep in the crib, right? We didn't need to do this scientific experiment to figure out, hey, by the way, a chimpanzee is going to naturally make a nest because it's an animal, and that babies, human babies, do not do that. This is wild.
Both subjects were observed during their physical development. Donald had a walking age stroller. This was because human infants don't develop walking until at least 10 months. Gua, on the other hand, could walk by the time she was with the Kellogg's. She also had a stroller, but she used it as a toy instead of a walking aid. Interestingly, Gua was beginning to mimic the way humans walk, adopting a more upright posture. The chimp was showing much quicker level of development as Donald for the age. The experiment continued to observe the differences between the two in the way they interacted with their environment.
So we're at the halfway mark here, and you're seeing the observed behaviors, which frankly, you really didn't need to do this to a child, a baby, in fact, to know all of these. Oh, well, the chimpanzee is having difficulty walking like a human, maybe because it's not a human. So you see, Gua and Donald, they obviously display stark physical and behavioral differences, with Gua showing more advanced motor skills, just like any animal would, because the human infant will develop at a much longer period, but also will last much longer, right? Will live much longer. And also with limited language capabilities, the ape is not going to talk like a human being, but they're starting to see here that Donald's language acquisition would struggle. And we wonder, a lot of people wonder why, first of all, Donald was put through this. And second, was this the reason, being made basically a lab rat, was this the reason why Donald's language was not developing? You know, Proverbs emphasizes nurturing children, not using them as an experiment, and nurturing them according to God's design, encouraging them, encouraging spiritual growth and maturity. But this experiment hindered Donald's growth. Obviously, this induced, I'm sure, a massive confusion on Donald's part, both in his social and emotional development. And these experiments illustrate what happens when we stray away from God's intent and prioritizing God, prioritizing love for God, love for others, that we belong in a family community structure, and that the child grows up best in that structure. Not that they can't, but that's the most ideal situation. I wonder if Donald's parents at this point are going, maybe this is not such a great idea. Proverbs 22:6 reads, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." But in this case, Donald is being trained up like a monkey. Ephesians 6:4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Right now, Donald is not being brought up in love. He's being brought up really like a lab rat. And we would soon see the unraveling of what's to come.
In the toddler months of childhood, the beginnings of reading and language start to develop. Part of this is the ability to point at things that interest the infant, and Gua exhibited these behaviours as well. The two infants, almost right from the start of the experiment, seemed to enjoy each other's company, with Donald showing great delight in interacting with his new sister. Gua would hold out hands to Donald, stroking her hair. As the experiment progressed, it seemed like the two, especially, had become attached to each other, always making a beeline for him when he entered the room, and noticeably got more excited when playing with Donald. If Gua was admonished for doing something wrong, Donald would go up to her and hug the chimpanzee. As Donald's speech developed, he was able to even say his sister's name. When another older child called Martha was introduced, Gua behaved similarly by hugging the 3.5-year-old, smelling her hair and holding her hand. Interestingly, Gua was much more reserved and timid around human adults, which to me sounds very similar to how a human child may act. Loud and excited with their peers, but quiet and shy around adults. Gua's actions around new adults was even more shy, and even at some times seemed fearful. The pair's interactions with other animals was characteristically childlike as well, with Gua stroking the next door neighbour's cat and having seemingly no fear in approaching adult dogs, much like a human child. But this would change at the age of 11 months, when a puppy barked at her after she had mistakenly taken the dog running as a game of tag. From then on, she became scared of almost all other animals, including chickens, cats, and even birds in the trees. Gua's emotional responses to being admonished or punished for any number of minor behavioural infractions elicited an interesting response. She would noticeably become distressed, and then approach the experimenters for affection or a kiss.
Okay, I don't know what's so surprising about that, because that's kind of normal animal and human behavior. But we'll stop here, analyze really where we are here. So we're talking about daily routines now. They're starting to develop, and they're seeing the developmental differences between the two. And so they have this really rigorous daily routine aimed to shape both Gua's and Donald's behavior as human siblings. And you can see that they're getting attached to one another, that Donald is comforting Gua when Gua gets in trouble. And this experiment really is attempting to foster Gua's behavior, like walking upright, but they're having trouble eating with a spoon as opposed to just with hand, sleeping in a crib that we're seeing, and even now seeing animalistic behavior in Gua, obviously, because he's an animal. But, children's routines should ideally reflect not this experiment, but nurturing, that the environment is God-centered, not just test subject-centered. A child will thrive in an environment where God is at the center, because when God is at the center, you'll be the most loving to that child, the most caring and nurturing to that child. And this study is highlighting the consequences of stripping really spiritual routine and spiritual purpose. You can have routine, but if there's no purpose there, you'll die inside. And that's what we see. You go on a bus, you go on a subway, you walk around, and you'll see people in routine, but without spiritual purpose. There's dead inside. There's deadness inside. And when you turn something that should be caring and loving into something that's just conditioning, for the sole purpose to serve oneself, then really it's not going to work, because God designed the family routines to provide security and to cultivate faith. We know that there's something beyond this material world, beyond this physical realm, that is cultivated, that the soul, our spirit. And Deuteronomy 6:7 says, "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your home, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." In the Soviet Union, there was this new man and this genetic experimentation, that what they did was they supported this science project to create this new man, so to speak. And they aligned it, obviously, with these communist ideals. And one infamous attempt was this Russian scientist, Ilya Ivanovich. And his experiment created a human-ape hybrid, that had these communist values. And these experiments were crazy, because they were extremely unethical. They tried to take the power of this ape with the brain of the human, and really it did not work. It was horrific, and maybe we'll go into that in another video. But the animals that were brutalized and the humans it was horrific. And the scientific insights from it were, you can guess, none, right? Because when you manipulate creation to satisfy ideological goals, we can see the dangers. Bending science, bending humanity for political ends, for military ends, will betray our consciences, will betray our human brothers and sisters, and to achieve a goal that is man-centered. Romans 1:22 warns of humanity becoming fools while claiming wisdom, which is evidence of humans trying to exert control over creation without regard for the design of God, the ethics of God. And when you take God out of things, then humans will naturally just destroy.
As a form of forgiveness for committing the faux pas. This is a similar type of behaviour seen in children, but comes on later in social at around 18 to 24 months. This showed that Gua was developing faster emotionally than Donald, and that she was learning very human-like behaviours. She had mastered opening doors, especially a swinging door, a month before Donald. At the age of 1 year, Gua had figured out that light switches controlled the electric light bulbs. As such, when an adult put their hand up to the switch, Gua would look at the light in anticipation of its illumination. The experimenters attempted to teach both how to play patty cake. Donald picked it up rather quickly, and with little prompts, happily followed the game. Gua, on the other hand, never learned how to play properly, even though she was given daily opportunities to practice. The two subjects also underwent potty training.
So even something as simple as patty cake that the ape could not learn. Patty cake, I mean, humans could pick it up quickly, but the ape couldn't. So you see here animalistic raw strength, but you see the intelligence of the human far greater.
Gua had more accidents than Donald and was seemingly embarrassed when she made them. Eventually she would indicate that she wanted to go to the toilet by oohing and holding her genital area. This would develop to her going to an experimenter and indicating by tugging on the adult's trousers. Throughout the experiment, both of the subjects were given the opportunity to use a spoon. Like many other observations, the Kellogg's saw that Gua was way ahead in proficiency than Donald. By 13 months, she was using the spoon for self-feeding with little mess, in contrast to Donald, who had mastered the skill by around 18 months. Another test was devised where a reward was placed behind a wire mesh attached to a door frame. The only way to get to the reward is via the use of a hoe to drag it under a small gap in the mesh. Although both figured out the solution at around 100 attempts, Gua proved to be more consistent in her success rate. The Kellogg's wanted to probe into a vital part of the human experience next, and that was something that makes us unique: language. For this part is where Gua would fall behind, and Donald would develop some strange new behaviours. Gua's language development differed to that of a human child, in the sense that she would communicate her wants physically, like pointing to her mouth for food. As we saw with her potty training, the need to empty her bowels was indicated non-verbally. This was the same for when she wanted to play, by grabbing one or both hands of her intended playmate. She would also pull experimenters' hands to items she needed help with. The vocal communication Gua achieved was limited to oohs, ahs and grunts. This is where Donald exceeded, as almost from the start of the experiment he was attempting to vocalise his emotions and needs. This would develop into vocalising actual words, a feat Gua failed to reach. But something rather worrying began to become apparent in Donald, in that his speech became stunted. This is likely due to his lack of socialising outside the experimental setting, and as such, failed to pick up words discovered by interaction of one's peers. He was only in possession of around 6 words, but he did show signs of vocal imitation, although not from his human carers, but instead from his chimpanzee sister. The Kellogg's noticed Donald barking like a dog to communicate certain emotions. The child would also screech, scream, and even ooh like an ape.
Imagine having your child, instead of developing their language, they're starting to bark like a dog. I mean, that would be scary for a parent. I mean, I have 2 kids, and if you're doing this in the name of science and all of a sudden you realize, the child that I was responsible for taking care of, instead of speaking, is now barking like a dog. I'm sure at this point the parents must have been going, okay, maybe we're gonna back off on this thing.
Although not learning to speak words herself, did learn the words spoken to her. Initially, she would react just to the tone of the way the words were spoken, but she began to show signs of being able to differentiate between different commands. Initially, she would react to no and kiss, but her word reaction vocabulary eventually expanded to around 95 words, including the ability to point out parts of her anatomy when asked. Donald, from the start of the experiments, was slow to learn commands, but this is probably attributable to his lower mobility compared to Gua. Once he was more proficient with climbing and walking, he would overtake his sister. Donald's apparent social and vocal issues caused concern by the 9th month of the experiment in Luella, and as such, the experiment was abruptly brought to an end. Gua was evicted from a human household and sent back to Robert Yerkes on the 28th of March 1932. From there, she would be the subject of a number of other experiments conducted by Robert's wife, Ada.
Imagine getting convicted. Imagine getting evicted after you had just been experimented on. Hey, this monkey has already been taken away from its natural parents and then started to bond with Donald. So there's attachment happening, there's affection happening, and then Donald is barking, he's imitating Gua sounds, his language is being disrupted, so everybody is getting messed up here. Now, the Bible tells us to be good stewards, right? To be good stewards of this earth. And obviously that involves the people. And that involves the animals. And in this case, there's evil being done here. This blending of identity leads to the danger of losing distinct and God-ordained roles for his creation. Like, you see Gua really going through a lot of unnatural things. So we can only imagine the mental and emotional harm happening to this animal, but also the mental and emotional and physical and human harm happening to Donald, this human, which is even more atrocious. Because when you take a child and you surround them just with animals and not other children, then the Bible shows us and teaches us for a long time that children imitate what they see. This proves the importance of positive godly influences around them, right? Other children, other parents, other maybe godparents or people that love God as well. And for Christians, for people who believe in the Bible, follow the Bible, this means that we want to foster communities within God's family that ensure children grow up into the likeness of Christ by surrounding them with people who are endeavoring to be the likeness of Christ. And this would prevent behavioral confusion that both Gua and Donald are going through at this moment. And that's why I think they stopped the experiment. Proverbs 13:20, whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Now, what was the companion of Donald in his early years, which are crucial for human development, brain development? A monkey, right? Like, this is my companion. My early years was this monkey, and now I'm developing into a monkey. This is very sad, to say the least. And you see that Gua's language obviously is going to stop. Donald as well starts saying these animal sounds instead of forming words. And this is alarming now the parents. I think this is where there was critical failure in the experiment, or at least they saw it, right? They saw, okay, well, something's not right here. Language, in fact, is a profound gift from God. It's given to humanity. It's used for communication and for communion with not just one another, but with God. We have this gift of language because now we can speak to God. In our minds, we can speak to God. In prayer, we can speak to God. The absence of verbal development in Gua underscores the distinction between humanity and animals. And attempting to merge these distinctions leads to confusion, as evidenced in Donald's development. Language is designed to bless and glorify God. Is designed to connect us with one another and connect us with God. And it's not a subject of experimentation to an animal. And at the behest and at the unfortunate downfall also of Donald, we would see. In Genesis 11:1-9, there's the story of Babel and how language unites humans and how God uses this language to disperse them because they also wanted to just be like gods. James 3:9-10 is, with our tongue we bless our Lord and our Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. See, we can use the things that God gives us for good and for evil. We would see here the ultimate aftermath of what's to come.
But what of all the data collected from the study? And what was the result of the 9-month ape and baby experiment? Well, the Kellogg's, now back to being a conventional family, moved back to Indiana, and the couple set about writing a book and publishing their study. Winthrop's results showed that he was disappointed that Gua had hit a wall of development. He had generally hoped that immersing the ape into the human household would have created the reverse of a wild raised by wolves child. It's undeniable that Gua did develop many human-like behaviours, such as walking more upright, being relatively potty trained, understanding a multitude of commands, and even showing off her problem-solving skills. Ultimately, Gua was limited by the fact that she was a chimpanzee, and that her heredity limited her ultimate ability of language. Essentially, nurture can only take you so far until nature catches up. Initially, the experiment went public when the article was published in the American Psychological Journal. It was written in such a way as to appeal to as many people as possible. This, unsurprisingly, generated a lot of interest in the press at the time, and by the time a full book was released in 1933, the study and its ease of accessibility resulted in polarizing opinions. Many critics pointed out that Gua being pulled from her biological mother at such a young age and the suddenness of the ending of her adoption. This, no doubt, must have been very traumatic for the young chimp, to be ripped twice from her perceived home. But the biggest criticism came from the use of Donald as a test subject. Understandable, after all, it was on Llewellyn's insistence that the study be terminated. The extended period of 9 months in which Donald was used in the experiment resulted in his development being stunted. And needless to say, this...
Imagine doing that. So one of this experiment here that you're seeing is how they just spun Donald, and they kept spinning Donald until he was through like extreme vertigo, and you can see here that Donald was crying, right? Like, hold on, where's that? Yeah, you can see here.
Period of 9 months in which
obviously
Donald
is
experiments.
Like you're doing this to your own child for the sake of science, and this is why we can't make science our god, because this study obviously was eventually condemned for ethical reasons, and particularly the effects on Donald. And what happens is Gua dies eventually. Donald sadly suffers psychological effects all the way until adulthood, and Donald eventually commits suicide. So we see Gua dying, probably from all of the stress that has been put on this chimpanzee to not even grow up in its proper environment, and for Donald to grow up with speech impediments and psychological and mental disorders. At the time, probably they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it is because we've advanced so much in mental disorders now in today's age. But Donald would eventually die a year after his parents died, and his parents probably regretted it their entire life. I wonder if they blamed one another for doing this, or what happened, because they saw the effect of that 1 year doing that to their child, and the effect of that the entire life. There's repercussions of putting science above God, and really making this just this naturalistic worldview our ultimate philosophy, versus no, we are mind, body, and soul, and we need to nurture all of those things, not just one of those things. When you nurture just the natural and you let go of the supernatural, naturally what will happen is absolute chaos and anarchy and destruction, both in the mind, body, and soul. And we see that happen here. Eventually they tried to publish a book. Nobody wanted it because they saw that this was extremely unethical. You see, God calls us to ethical stewardship over creation, treating all life with respect and recognizing humans' life and its sacredness because we are created in the image of God. And using children as experiments, obviously in this case, harmed his spiritual, mental, and physical development. It defies this commandment. Moreover, we see that Jesus is the ultimate example of humanity and servitude, that Christians are to approach science and knowledge with compassion, with wisdom, not at the expense of human dignity. In all these things, we can take something that is good and use it for God, use it for God's glory, use it for the glory of our Maker and for the good of humanity. But if we use it for selfish reasons, then really it will lead to horror. And Philippians 2:3-4 says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." Now, these parents, if they were looking at the interest of their child, then maybe this ape wouldn't have gone through this and this child wouldn't have gone through this. But they were looking only at selfish ambition. Hey, what can we find out about this? And in the process, they put a human life in harm's way. This is happening every single day. This is happening every single day, that we don't put God first. This is happening in our own lives when we don't put God first, we put something else ahead of God. And this ape and child experiment reflects humanity's drive to manipulate and understand creation apart from God, that this experiment, aiming to break down divinely ordered boundaries, fails. And instead, this serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when we abandon God's design for human life and relationships. In contrast, Jesus Christ came to restore our broken nature through his sacrifice on the cross 2,000 years ago on Calvary, offering a way back to communion with God, to provide a purpose that transcends human experimentation and ambition. That Jesus' finished work on the cross underscores humanity's worth and ultimate hope in him alone, where neither nature nor nurture can substitute the transforming power of the Holy Spirit and of grace, that we are saved by grace alone. Not only in Christ can we discover our true identity, your true identity. You can see your calling, that in it we are called to live as God's image bearers, reflecting his love, his holiness to all creation. Well, there you guys have it. I hope this has blessed you and also taught us, reminded us to put God first, not science. Science is created by God. Science is enabled by God, but science is not our God. I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, a wonderful afternoon, wherever you are. Until next time, God bless you, and we will see you again soon. Bye.